Well, I'm delighted to introduce now somebody who I knew from the very first moments that I met him has a beautiful and impactful and important Torah to share. Scott Fried is an educator, an international award-winning speaker and writer. As a person living with HIV for over 34 years, he survived that 20th century pandemic and has a wisdom to share about this one. His HIV/AIDS support group became the inspiration for a Broadway musical that you may be familiar with, Rent. He's the author of 4 books, including his newest, How to Raise an Elegant Teen, The ABCs of Gen Z Parenting, an adjunct professor at Colby College where he teaches a popular class called AIDS and the Meaning of Life. He lives in New York City with his puppy, Galileo.
So as Rabbi mentioned, the support group that I joined when I first got infected with HIV in 1987, 34 years ago, next month, was the one from which the musical Rent was based upon. And in fact, there is a character in the musical which is based on me, different name, but I'll tell you a little bit about a little later. Something I said one night made it into the musical. And he wrote it, the guy who wrote it wrote about us and other people that he knew and sort of immortalized our story. I was pissed at first, but I'm grateful now because there are so many teenagers today who have no idea what it was like. We remember, but they don't. And yet now we find ourselves in another pandemic. And tonight, I thought it'd be really interesting if I could inspire you with some of the wisdom that we learned, not just me and my friends, but all of us in this room, we were there. What we remember and what we learned in those days from that pandemic, which happened to a smaller demographic than COVID, but the lessons are the same. And I'll start by giving you a little piece of a poem by my favorite poet, Yehuda Amichai, who was the poet laureate of Israel who died about 17 years ago. And if you don't know about Yehuda Amichai, please just Google the love poems of Yehuda Amichai, beautiful, beautiful poet. In one of his poems, he says, Ani rotzeh liyot shuv katuv b'sefer hachayim. I want to be written in the book of life. Kol hazman liyot katuv, all the time, every day, anew, to be written again and again, until the hand that does the writing tichav, until the hand that does the writing hurts. I want to be written in the book of life, even if it hurts. In another one of his poems, he writes, we saw a bare and sickly tree covered only with a few pine cones, and Tzvi said to me that trees on the verge of dying give off the ripest fruit. So tonight, I want to give you the wisdom of those who died of AIDS at another time in our lives, at a time when another pandemic was being ignored, and see if we can apply it to what's going on in our lives today with this pandemic and personally with our own individual lives, because life is hard. It's difficult. And there are lessons that can help us get through that. Much of what I teach now, and will teach you tonight, comes from the pine cones, the ripest fruit given off by those friends of mine who died of AIDS in the late 80s and early 90s, whose parents are dying of old age right now. Once upon a time, they thought there'd be nobody to say Kaddish for them because their sons and daughters died. They couldn't sell a house in Syosset if they knew that somebody died of AIDS in that house. You couldn't, I remember the funerals I went to where fathers and mothers would say to me, if you tell anybody here how Jennifer died, how Michael died, I'll have to ask you to leave the funeral because nobody knows that it was AIDS. They think it was cancer. We remember those days. But with those days, we're also lost a lot of wisdom, some of amazing lessons that my friends who died taught. And tonight I want to answer the question, what is the this in that prayer for which we are so grateful, for which gives our life meaning and hope? And the first important thing I want to share is this idea of surrender, of hanging out in the I don't know. Life is hard and I don't know what to do. And there is tremendous power in surrendering to the I don't know. In fact, I like to think that my greatest power comes when I give up my power and I just bear witness to what stands before me. I was teaching in a summer camp, Ramah, in Palmer, New England, so many years ago, and it was Shabbos, it was raining, and so many of the kids did not want to play ultimate frisbee in the rain. Some did, some didn't. The ones who stayed inside sat in a class with a rabbi and myself, and we called it the God Seminary. It was a 1-hour talk on God. And the rabbi said, before we talk about God, how God is present in our lives this week, if God exists at all, we need someone to invite God into this circle. So the rabbi looked at me, and I looked at the person next to me, who looked at the person next to her, and they went around the circle and nobody spoke. And the rabbi said, certainly somebody here will give us a prayer to invite God into the circle. To talk about God, we got to invite God in, right? So who will give us a prayer? And then we looked the other direction, and of course, it went around and nobody said a prayer. So the rabbi said to this one girl hiding from the rest of us on the couch outside the circle playing with her shoelaces, he said, you there, you outside the circle on the couch hiding from the rest of us playing with your shoelaces, you will give us a prayer. And she looked up at us and she said, me? Rabbi, I'm just here because I don't want to get wet from the rain ultimate frisbee. He said, we'll take any prayer at all. We'll wait the whole hour. If all we get this hour is your prayer, speak vidai, it will be enough. And more than enough. So she looked down at her sneakers and played with the shoelaces, and she looked back up at us, looking at her, and she was flush with nervousness, and her mouth was parched and dry, and she spoke, and she said, Rabbi, I don't know. I just don't know. And the rabbi said, thank you. What a beautiful prayer. That's the perfect prayer, he said, to invite God in. When you don't know what to do and you call on God's name, we say in Havdalah, I don't know how many of us know this, but there's a line in Havdalah that says, I raise my cup of rescue and I call on God's name. I raise my cup of rescue and I call on God's name. In other words, I don't know what to do. That's when God walks in the room. So the first page in this pandemic playbook, as it were, on how to survive life when life hurts is to surrender to what you don't know so that God can be here in the room. I don't know is enough because you are enough. And that's a great lesson right there in itself. To believe that what you have to bring to every room is itself enough because you are enough is enough because with the I don't know. So the first thing we do, right, when we don't know what to do, when life is hard and hurts, is we surrender to what we don't know and we admit that we don't know so that God can walk in. God's not in the future and God's not in the past. God is only here in this moment, and this moment is the I don't know moment. And then you got to ask yourself, what do you know? Page 2 in the pandemic playbook, Surviving Difficult Life. What do you know? In our support group, people would raise their hands on Wednesday nights from 7 to 9, and they'd say, I just got diagnosed with AIDS. I haven't told my parents. I don't know what my T-cell count is. I don't know how long I've got to live. And remember, this is 1987 when there was not even AZT wasn't even taken off the shelves to the end of that year to be used. There was no drugs for HIV. There was only hope and maybe a little bit of ACT and not enough of either. So the facilitator would say, well, what color is your shirt? And what row are you sitting in? And how do your feet feel in your socks? So let me ask you this right now. When you don't know what to do, after you surrender to the I don't know, so that God can sit next to you, ask yourselves what you do know. What color is your shirt? What row are you sitting in tonight? The row you chose to sit in. How do your feet feel in your shoes? This is all that we know. And it's enough. It's so important to ask ourselves when life is hard, when we're in the moment of crisis, we're in a long, extended, protracted version of crisis, which is what these 20 months have been, to ask ourselves, where are we in this moment? What do I know? I'm wearing a red sweater. I'm with Rabbi Derner and his congregation. And an old high school friend is sitting here in front of me. And it's enough. I don't need anything else. I got food in the fridge, a few T cells in my bloodstream, a dog sitter for my dog, and you. It's enough. When we don't ask ourselves these questions in the midst of a crisis, here's where we go. We go into the imagined future, which is all it ever is, imagined, and we create what's known as the psychologists call the anticipatory grief, the what-ifs. It's all anticipatory. And basically, in other words, it's anxiety. So when that moment arrives of how am I going to survive this, whatever this is, and we forget to be grateful for the this in the prayer that is what is a part of God's world, because we're so busy worrying about how we're going to survive this in the anticipatory future, which is only grief and anxiety. When we leave the moment that we're in, we forget that we have enough right here in this moment. Everything we need is right here in this moment. When I got my diagnosis, it was a Wednesday afternoon. It was 12:30 in the afternoon. It was a healthcare center in Department of Health in New York City. It still exists in Chelsea. And I walked all the way to the east side. It was the west side to the east side. And I stopped at a bookstore. This is before the internet. 1987, I didn't have Google. What do I do with an HIV diagnosis? So I went to a bookstore, which don't exist anymore, and I went to the self-help section, and I saw a book by a man named Stephen Levine. And I bought it for one reason and one reason only. Because when I went to get tested for HIV, I gave a fake name. I didn't want the name Scott Fried to be attached to an HIV positive diagnosis. So I gave a fake Jewish name. I figured Stephen, close enough to Scott. I was subletting the Levy's apartment, so I'll call myself Levine. Okay, I'll be Stephen Levine. So Stephen Levine was the name that got an HIV diagnosis on June 1st, 1988, 6 months after I got infected. And that very day, I went to the bookstore on the east side and saw a book by a man named Stephen Levine, pronounced Levine, famous foremost author on death and dying, along with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. He died 3 years ago, and his book, among many others, was called Who Dies? And I read every word of that book. And in that moment when I got the book, I knew that God existed. I knew that those coincidences don't happen they happen for a reason. And I answered. I followed. I followed him everywhere. I went to his workshops. I went to his retreats. I read. It was before YouTube. I had to go in person, right? You can YouTube him now. But back then, I sat at his feet. And I'll teach you the most important thing I learned from Stephen Levine at one of his workshops on death and dying. And in that room were hundreds of people living with a life-challenging illness. We used to say life-threatening, but now we say life-challenging. It's a PC term, in which, by the way, we are all living with a life-challenging illness. It's called life. Every day. And we're all searching for a purpose, which I think is a little overrated, because getting out of bed in the morning is enough of a purpose for most of us. It's enough that we got out of bed when life is hard. That day in that one of those workshops, Stephen Levine said this to all of us. At this workshop, most of the people there were dying already or living with some kind of life-challenging illness, cancer or HIV and AIDS. So when he said, I'm going to give you the secret to life, we all sat on the edge of our seats, including myself. And he said, here's the secret to life. It's simple, but not easy. It's 2 words and really hard to live. But I'll tell you, if you really want to know, the secret to life, it's just 2 words. Pay attention. That's it. In this moment, what color is your shirt? What row are you sitting in? How does it feel? The air around you. Is it enough? That is the this for which we are grateful in God's world. That God brings to us, brings us together. That is the this. Pay attention. When I was in high school, I took Mr. Duffy's class in film and TV. I don't remember much from that class except watching a lot of black and white movies in the dark. But he told me this amazing thing. He said, when you watch a movie, don't just look at the actress and the actor in the center of the screen. The director set up the shot just so you could see so it can propel the storyline. I want you to look at everything in the top left-hand corner and the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. Look at everything in the screen. And he was speaking metaphorically as well. Pay attention to everything that's in front of you. Notice it all. I remember being an actor in acting class at NYU, and the teacher would say, your objective is to pick up the cup of coffee on stage left and walk to stage right and deliver the line. And I did that very thing. And she said, no, you didn't do it. I said, yeah, I picked up the cup of coffee. I walked from left to right, and I said the line. She said, yeah, but you missed everything along the way. And that's what makes you a good actor, she said. The good actors notice everything on the way to the next line. Because that informs the next line. Pay attention to the seat you chose tonight, the shirt you chose tonight, the people God chose to bring to you tonight. In this moment, in this very moment, is all you need. And from that comes the song in the musical Rent, No Day But Today. We would say, it's this moment. We don't have tomorrow. We're not promised anything more than midnight tonight, and that's if we're lucky. It's no day but today. And from that line that we'd say over and over again, Jonathan Larson, who wrote the musical Rent, wrote the song, No Day But Today. Number 1, when you don't know what to do, surrender to the I don't know so that God can take over, or at least sit next to you. And then ask yourself, what do you know in this moment? Pay attention to this moment. So the character that I played in Rent was this character named Paul, and the support group, Life Support, in the first and second act. So one night in the support group, I was really angry. I was always the facilitator's pet. I sit in the front row all the time, and I'd always take everybody out with the most beautiful closing 3-minute share. Except this one night I was angry because my friends were dying. Friends that I had just met. Friends who were 24 years old like me, dying so quickly of AIDS. And I didn't understand why my sickness hadn't happened yet. When was my opportunistic infection going to arrive, and what was it going to be? Was I going to be blind in one eye? Was I going to need a wheelchair? Was I going to have Kaposi sarcoma, or all of the above? And I was angry with all the love talking and being in the moment talking and forgiveness talk. I was angry, and I said at the back of the room, because I sat at the back that night, I find some of what I'm finding you, the quote was, I said was, I'm suspicious of you because I'm supposed to be dead and I'm not. And in the musical, the character Paul says, I wrote it down, look, I find some of what you say suspect. because I'm used to relying on intellect, but I try to open up to what I don't know, but reason says I should have died 3 years ago. And then the music swells, and the chorus sings, there's only this, there's only now, forget regret, or life is yours to miss. No day but today. Live in this moment only. John Fletcher Harris was a friend of mine who was dying of AIDS in the early 90s, and I remember where I was when he said this next sentence to me, page 3 in my pandemic playbook on how you survive life when it hurts. I was sitting on the floor, he was standing up and speaking, and I think I saw the words leave his lips and dance around the room when he said this sentence. When a tree reaches up to drink in the sun, it never asks itself if it is deserving. When a tree reaches up to drink in the sun, it doesn't say, oh my God, I couldn't possibly photosynthesize today because I'm so fat. I'm so gay. I don't belong. I'm not enough. I can't possibly capture the energy of the sun, in turn use it and give off carbon dioxide. I don't deserve it. The tree knows what it needs to do, and we must be like the tree. In essence, what was John Fletcher Harris saying, and I love saying his name, he died a few months after he said this sentence, John Fletcher Harris. He was saying that you don't have to do or be or say anything to deserve love. You breathe, you belong, you are enough exactly as you are. You are deserving of love, not because of what you do, but because of who you are. It is your birthright. You are completely loved because you are completely lovable. So take that in. When was the last time you heard that? You are completely loved, not just on Sunday mornings and not just when you do good deeds and not just on good hair days. You are completely loved because you are completely lovable. And you know this, you say this to your children and your grandchildren. You've said to them, there's not a thing you could say or do that would take my love away. They don't know that. The roots of unconditional love are being established right now, and they won't know it until we're gone from the planet, that there's now one less person on the planet in front of whom they can fail and still have a place at the table. That's unconditional love, and they don't know it until we're gone. But you say to them, so that they start to believe it now, there's nothing you can do or say or not say that's going to take my love away. The question I ask you, don't answer, just think, is when was the last time you said that to yourself? It's a beautiful question that comes from the Unitarian Universalist Church that says, what is the most loving thing I can do or say right now? And when I hear that, I always think about somebody else. What's the most loving thing I can say to somebody else? And what's the most loving thing I can do for somebody else? But I'm turning it on me. What's the most loving thing I can say to myself right now? What's the most loving thing you can do for yourself right now? That is what it means to know that you are completely loved because you are completely lovable. Your turn to believe it. And that is what heals. Number 4, page 4 from my pandemic playbook on how to survive life when life hurts is about the quality of life that you're seeking. One night, a young man came into support group, and it's interesting to note that these were young men of seeming privilege. White, Jewish men dying of AIDS, some women, some drug addicts, a few hemophiliacs, who had so much privilege but still died. So one night he came and said, I'm dying. I feel it. And I don't know how to tell my parents, and it's going to kill them. His name was Ross. And he had shaved his head because of the chemotherapy that he was losing his hair from the brain tumor related to the AIDS, the virus in his bloodstream. And the facilitator said, I think I got it. I'm hearing you loud and clear, but I don't hear the problem. And so Ross repeated himself and said, okay, let me explain. I lost my hair. I feel like I'm dying, and I don't know how to tell my parents. It's going to kill them. And again, he wiped his eyes. And she said, yeah, we heard all that. And I know this sounds harsh. Stay with me on this. Just stay with it. Was harsh, but there's a point here. She said, we all heard that. Still not hearing the problem. Let's try to see what it would be like just for 1 hour of our Shabbos to live life without adjectives. It's not the best thing in the world, and it's not the worst thing in the world. It's just the thing. We assign things, whether they're good or bad. We assign them adjectives, when in fact it's just what is. Right? She said, the quality, and I quote, remember this, the quality of the happiness that you seek in your life does not depend upon your circumstances, because circumstances are neutral. The happiness you seek and the quality of the happiness that you seek in your life depends on your relationship to those circumstances. In essence, so what are you going to do about it? Which sounds kind of harsh, but it's actually the most healing thing you can ask somebody. Right, this sucks. Now, what are you going to do about it? That's your power. It's when we look at it and say, this is bad, or this is good, that we shut out the opportunity to see it for what it really is. Maybe a moment to surrender to God's will. The quality of our happiness depends on how we relate to our circumstances, what we're going to do about them, not the circumstances themselves. And number 5, and this is the big one, and it's what I came here to talk to you about mostly tonight. When life hurts, let it. It's a really awkward sentence. When life hurts, let it. I said this sentence to a room full of 11th graders many years ago at the Golda Ach Academy, when it was then known as the Solomon Schechter of West Orange, New Jersey. And a teenager on the aisle there sneezed, and I said, bless you. And because I think that God is talking to me all the time, even right now when I'm with you in front of you right now, because God talks faster than even I can talk, I heard this prompt in my head that said, say it again, put it together. Say it again, put it together. So I just listened, and I did. And I said again, and I put it together. When life hurts, let it. Bless you. I think God is talking to us all the time. We just don't listen. And here's another prayer to say at the Kotel. Here's another one. Dear God, help me remember my prayers. Because I think God answers our prayers, but many of them, if not all, but we're so busy praying for the next thing, we forgot what we prayed for last week, and that prayer has been answered. Help me to remember my prayers. When life hurts, let it bless you. When life hurts, let it bless you. When life hurts, let it bless you. So there's this nursery rhyme that we all were taught when we were little kids, and I guess it's still being taught. Row your boat down the stream, merrily, 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 life is but a dream. What a sweet nursery rhyme. There are 7 verses. And the final verse, I never knew, is the one that really matters. We don't teach our children the final verse, but it's written for children, and it goes like this. Row, row, row your boat, watch the river flow. Rowing's fun, but rowing's hard. This is what I know. There's 7 verses of that nursery rhyme, which is ultimately about acceptance of what life is. It's a dream, and it's hard, and it's everything in between. But somewhere our teachers, our parents, our guardians thought it would be wrong to teach us the final verse until life taught it to us. Rowing's fun and rowing's hard, and this is what I know. So what do you do when life hurts? You let it. Dominic was a friend of mine who died in a car accident a year ago after surviving living with AIDS for so many decades. And when he got his diagnosis, he came to the room on a Wednesday night. He sat on the white couch and he said, "So now I have AIDS. And I thought if I got diagnosed with AIDS, AIDS would make me bigger. But now that I have AIDS, I see that AIDS didn't make me bigger. AIDS only showed me how big I've always been." Take that in. Let it situate itself somewhere inside of you. When life hurts, let it bless you means letting you find out how big you've always been. I don't agree with the scholars and the philosophers who say that when life hurts, it builds character. I disagree. I think the character's already been built. It just has been covered over by life. And it's when life hurts us that we find out how big we've always been. So my friend Jennifer was a nice Jewish girl from Scarsdale, Westchester. She went to Scarsdale High School, and I couldn't say her last name, Ferdman, until her mom and dad died of old age. Her mom was the one who said to me at the funeral in Westchester, in Mamaroneck, "You can't tell anybody here how she died. We're telling them, or her cousins, her relatives, that she died of liver cancer." And then she looked at me and she said, "Don't judge me. You don't know what it's like to lose a daughter." And she put me in my place. Jennifer was dying of AIDS in a nursing home on the Upper West Side, 110th, in 1993. And I went to say goodnight to her every night. And on this one night, I saw that her face was turned towards the window, so I went to the side of the bed where her face was turned, because that's where people look when they're dying. And many people who are dying of COVID or other diseases tonight will look out the window. And her face was turned there, and I went to that side of the bed, and I got down on my knees and made direct eye contact with her, thinking she would say what she always said every night when I would come after visiting hours, something like, "Hi, Scott, what's the weather like? Thank you for always visiting. How are you?" But instead, she was engaged in a conversation with something or someone, and she invited me into the conversation when she saw that I was there. I locked eyes with her, and she said, "It hurts. It hurts." Over and over and over, she said, "It hurts." And I wanted to say what I was taught to say when someone says it hurts, which is, it'll pass. Think nice thoughts. Time heals all wounds. And we know that's not true. Time doesn't heal all wounds. The tincture of time simply gives us time to adapt our lives around the wound. It's a great line. I'll say it again. The tincture of time simply gives us time to adapt our lives around the wound. She said, "It hurts, it hurts." And I said, well, I wanted to say, "Let me get the nurse to raise the level of morphine so you don't have to feel the pain. It'll pass." But instead I said the thing that was the one thing we never say, or I was never told when I was in pain, the true validating statement. So many of us invalidate when someone's in pain with the best of intentions. It starts when we're babies. A baby cries and we say, "Shh, shh, 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 shh," which calms them down, but it sends the message that there's something wrong with crying. And then when they're old enough to understand, we say, "Don't cry, stop crying," as if it's wrong to cry. So we invalidate. And so instead I did the one thing that I was never given to me. And I said, "Yes, that's the most validating sound in the world. Yes, it hurts, Jen," I said. "This hurts. AIDS hurts. Life hurts. And she locked her gaze into mine. She stopped talking and she started searching inside of me for something because I validated her, because I gave her permission to be where she was, because I met her in the moment and we surrendered together to that moment. She stared into my eyes for what seemed like a long time. And then she spoke and she said, and I'll never forget, she said, stopped hurting, stopped. I did not really take her pain away, and I didn't save her. She would die of AIDS a few weeks later in that nursing home at 3 o'clock in the morning, all alone. What I did was give her permission to have her pain, and it didn't hurt as much. If I were to ask you to hold 10 of these sidurim, they'd be heavy. And if I ask somebody next to you to hold one side of the books, and the other side of the books you hold, it wouldn't be as heavy. It's still 10 sidurim, and it's still the same weight, but it's been distributed. What that means is when we validate someone's pain, when we give them permission to be exactly who they are, when we meet them in the moment where they are, we pay attention, as Stephen Levine said, to where they are. It doesn't hurt as much anymore. Which brings up my final point, which is how do we help people when they're in pain? How do we take the siddur that's heavy? How do we take the pain from them if it's too much to bear? My great-aunt Mindel taught me how. Mindel survived Auschwitz, and I met her when I was a little boy in Brooklyn on Sunday nights when she'd pass a plate of babka my way. My great-aunt Mindel was a babka pusher. And she'd say to me with her Polish accent, "Skadi," 3 times, "Skadi, Skadi, Skadi." Tochas auf den Tisch. Tochas auf den Tisch, which most of you know. When I teach this in other rooms, they're like, what is that? But you remember hearing your great aunts tell you. Tochas auf den Tisch means put your tush on the table. Taka. Tochas auf den Tisch. And then she'd say, Ich soll dir lieb haben mehr, so that I can love you more. Show me who you are. Take the words out of your pockets, lay down your cards, open the scroll of your heart, and show me what's written thereupon, so that I can love you more. Give me more of you to love. There's nothing you could say or do that will take my love away. My great-aunt Mindel was one of the rare people that walked the earth that I like to call those loyal legion of loving followers. I call them the come here people. They're the ones who would always say, come here. And you know the come here people, and there are not that many left. They're not. Now, there's a difference between come here and come here. The come here people are going to punish you. Come here now, and you're in a lot of trouble. But the come here, the contraction, come here. I saved a seat for you. Sit next to me. Come here. I have an extra piece of pie for you. Come here and let me love you. Those people are rare. They're the ones who take your pain, and they hold it for you, and they help you through it. They don't judge, they don't scold, and they don't fix because they know you're not broken. They receive. They only receive. Their job is to receive. And they say yes to life's pain and contradictions and desires. When we were born, each of us were wrapped in a piece of muslin fabric that was called a receiving blanket. And then we were placed on a table to be weighed, and it was known as a receiving table. Once upon a time, the world received us. We were wrapped in a cloak of kindness. And then we became adults, and we survived a pandemic, and some of us just barely. And life is hard for many reasons I don't need to explain to you. We need to wrap ourselves and be wrapped by others in that receiving blanket again, in that cloak of kindness. And anytime you hear, I'll speak for myself, I hear the words, come here, I am once again wrapped in the receiving blanket, in that cloak of kindness. And my great Aunt Mindel is reaching down, speaking down from heaven, saying, show me who you are so that I can love you more. The Khmer people are missing. Bring them back. Be a Khmer person for someone in your life who needs arms, literally arms, not a Zoom call, but arms wrapped around them to be reminded that they are enough exactly as they are. The Khmer people ask you, what color is your shirt? What row are you sitting in? And how do you feel today? So we say, Baruch, we pray, Baruch, Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shekacha lo be'olam hazeh. Thank you, God, that such things as this exist in your world. I ask you to think this Shabbos and for the rest of your lives. What is the this for which we are so grateful? Find it, and if it's not in your life, if it's not in your world, put it in the world. Be the Khmer person for someone else. Open your arms, wrap them in a cloak of kindness. Nod your head as you have been nodding to me all night. Validate someone in their pain. Ask them about what it feels like to be them on the inside. Hold for them the heft of sorrow. Hold for them the heft of grief. And it will be a little bit lighter. And you will have said, come here. And you will have loved them more. And you will be doing my great Aunt Mindel a great service. And her memory will be for a blessing. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you so much.